you form bonds doing this kind of work that are really close, where you have that enormous level of trust. And sort of like I mentioned before, in some cases, those would be people who I consider to technically be competitors from a business standpoint, but you really don't end up feeling that mentality when you're on the ground there side by side with each other. You do look out for each other, you do help each other, you are ready to call each other's spouses if something goes wrong.
If the trust is cracked, where do we stand? Who keeps score when the facts land? This is media in the margins. Media in the margins.
Transparency statement. Okay, this podcast approaches journalism as a public evolving process rather than a finished product. We treat knowledge making as something that is developed through dialogue, not delivered as final authority. And while we retain editorial control, our goal is to make parts of that process visible in its uncertainties, its limits, and its revisions over time. Corrections and updates will be documented in the show notes. For context, I'm currently affiliated with Oslo Met University in the Department of Photojournalism, and this conversation was recorded on March 30th, 2026. And with that, let's begin with special guest Ford Fischer.
It took me a while to actually come up with these exact words to describe what I do, but the 3-word sequence that sort of describes the job that I do is primary source documentarian.
Great. I love that. I will keep that and I'll jot that down in my notes. For this conversation, we'll be focusing on the independent creator ecosystem within journalism and really thinking through how this connects to broader shifts in media and audiences and public knowledge. A little more about you for the audience. Ford Fischer is an independent filmmaker, journalist, and the co-founder and editor-in-chief of News to Share. Since 2014, Fischer has been a pioneer in primary source journalism, specializing in raw, unedited footage of political activism and civil unrest that bridges the gap between the front lines and global newsrooms. His work has been licensed by outlets ranging from CNN to Fox News and featured in Oscar-nominated films like BlacKkKlansman. However, his commitment to raw neutrality has made him a central figure in debate over platform power, and he has faced repeated demonetization by YouTube under, I believe, sensitive content shadow banning, also on X, and legal challenges regarding the status of independent creators as protected media outlets is a constant conversation. Today, we explore his role as vital discovery layer for the truth in an era of deepfakes and algorithmic failures. Or algorithmic, maybe failures, but I meant to say filters. Did I get that right? Is there something you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I like almost all of what you just said as a bio. The one word that I really don't love was at some point you said his neutrality or some, I heard the word neutral in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And I realize that people using the term neutral probably mean it in a positive way. But the clarification that I would make about my style of work, I don't even really love the word objective, but it goes in the direction of what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
And this is what I was getting to before, that the term that I really like is primary source.
Okay.
So I go out and document events and create what I consider to be a primary source documentation of what happened, meaning
Yes.
that it's raw videography, it's live stream when possible, that really gives you a raw recording of exactly what occurred. And it is not guided by whatever feelings I have about the particular situation. Right? Like whether or not I support the cause of a demonstrator, right? If I'm filming, pro-choice versus anti-abortion protesters, right? Like how I feel about that subject isn't influencing the manner in which I would document them. The reason I don't like the word neutral is that I think it implies a stated equivalence between multiple sides, right? There's kind of the meme of like, neutrality being, sort of like an irrational center position or something. So I take no position rather than a center position, which is why I try not to use the term neutral.
Fair.
Other than that, I loved your bio.
No, that's a really good point, and I'm happy that you brought that up because that's much more. I'll think in the future how to frame that, because that's really something that I think a lot of people consider but don't put into words. So I really enjoy that. Can you tell me how exactly, when was the shift for you to get into this type of documentation?
Yeah, so I actually co-founded News to Share way back in 2014 while I was attending American University with another student who now is actually the chief war correspondent for Fox News. But when we originally began, this was in the sort of pre-Trump era, but there was a lot of strife happening in the United States, a reckoning over violence related to race, related to police violence, and so forth. And so when we kind of just jumped in and began documenting political activism of all types, the purpose of it, I would say, sort of evolved over those years and became clarified over those years, which is, like I alluded to before, of kind of coming up with the term primary source documentary. The purpose that I found that I think I can fill, and that I think a lot of people find is missing in the media, is raw material that is not sort of guided by trying to enable an audience to believe they're sort of right, like telling them what they already think. I think that in a time period where media, and now in the past few years, social media, have become segmented, where you're turning on the TV channel before it was, and now you're using the social media platform, where you're finding people who already kind of have your beliefs or are going to kind of re-enable your beliefs. I think that a lot of people crave I just want to see raw footage of the thing that happened. I don't want to have someone with some particular political orientation color the way that they're telling me about it. Now, granted, you can't get rid of all of that, right? You can't make those sort of people go away. But I think that kind of coverage, where someone's sitting behind a desk and sort of telling you what to think about what's going on, kind of is a type of secondary source. And so people want that primary source on the ground documentation, which also then feeds both into news and documentary. So I'm sure we can sort of talk more about it. But what the business sort of evolved into is that while I am giving my audience sort of direct access to raw footage of what I see on the ground, the business purpose of it, right, the way that I actually sustain being able to do that, is by licensing it to news outlets and documentary films and so forth, aka secondary sources.
This is what I was curious about, because you're one person. You can only be so many places at one time. So how do you decide what to cover? And right now, within your business ecosystem, is it just you, or do you have other people working for you as primaries?
Yeah, so I do hire freelancers to basically shoot for me on assignment. And in some cases, freelancers will actually reach out and say, hey, I filmed this thing. It wasn't something we agreed on beforehand, but I filmed this thing. I think it, might matter. And then they negotiate essentially me buying it as a work for hire. So not everything that appears on News to Share is all shot by me. I would say that it's probably roughly 2/3 shot by me personally, but there's definitely really a team that sort of makes it possible by being able to hire other people.
What equipment do you use in the field and for editing?
Right. So my main camera is actually this exact camera, right? So I just filmed in LA on Saturday, right? I was with this in tear gas and all of that. And I also mount my phone using like a clamp thing onto the camera. So in practice, it looks like this when I'm out filming something. The purpose of the cell phone being mounted on top of the 4K camera is that when the connection allows, and so in some cases with large crowds or in places without great cell coverage, this becomes not possible. But where possible, by having my phone mounted on top of the big camera, I can live stream from the phone whilst filming on the big camera. The purpose of the live stream is to have a not only in real time recording of what's going on, but essentially an unedited one. That in theory, if somebody wanted to, look at the footage that I end up publishing from the 4K camcorder, where I have cut it down into what I think are kind of the important highlights and so forth, somebody could actually see even the wider context of that by referring to the live stream. Although this basically never happens, if anybody wanted to sort of like challenge the objectivity of my presentation of the raw footage, the live stream would give them even a more primary format in which to do that, and an ability to see the context of every shot. So typically when I go out to an event, either through live stream or through clips from the phone, people are seeing content in real time that way. But what I ultimately end up publishing on YouTube, Facebook, X, and then licensing to outlets is what comes out of the high-end camera, which I try to edit into highlights and essentially publish that same night. I think your question also included what software do I use. For what it's worth, I use Final Cut Pro X. I have just found to do the most efficient processing and exporting. I also love Adobe Premiere. I actually enjoy it better as a software, but I have found that for whatever reason on field, Final Cut just seems to process like that much faster.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. So with your, let's talk a little bit about streaming and platforms and maybe the story of what happened to you as far as demonetization. So what platforms are you currently on now?
I guess I'm not sure because I actually have examples from all three of the platforms I'm going to cite of large scale demonetization, that kind of thing. So the three primary social media platforms that I use are Facebook, YouTube, and formerly Twitter, now X. Um, my guess, because I think it was the most prominent one, is that what you're referring to is issues I've had with YouTube. So there were two separate moments in which I had fights with YouTube. Twice I've been channel demonetized and then sort of beaten them to get them to put it back. So the first one happened in 2019. There was this event that on the internet was dubbed the Vox Adpocalypse. If you look up that very particular string of letters, you should find information about this. Essentially, what had happened was that one YouTuber had made kind of bullying comments about another that the other content creator, to people who would know this, was Steven Crowder and Carlos Maza, I think were the names of the two people involved. That Carlos Maza was saying that Steven Crowder was making hateful remarks about him, a fellow YouTuber, in a way that YouTube should, at the very least, not be putting ads on. That the argument was that Steven Crowder was making money off of hateful or bullying type content. And YouTube basically said that under their rules at the time, Steven Crowder's behavior was not violative, but that they ought to change the rules so that it would be, and essentially put a stricter set of guidelines on what they consider to be hateful. And when they did this, there were about 1,000 channels that were simultaneously demonetized. And somewhat prominently, mine was one of them. And as we kind of talked about, my footage is raw documentation of what happens on the ground at political events and so forth. I certainly have never said anything myself. I certainly represent nothing that would be sort of deemed hateful by the powers that be. But it created an interesting problem because I actually had a video of there were people arguing pro and anti-Palestine points outside of AIPAC, and a Holocaust denier showed up. There was a guy who showed up who had an anti-Israel position, but from a Holocaust-denying perspective. And what to me was very interesting was the activists of both sides basically started arguing with that guy, right? The pro-Israel and the pro-Palestine people were both like, Holocaust denier is no good, right? And I had a video of this interaction. And YouTube, when they demonetized my entire channel, they removed that particular video. And the stated sort of reasoning is that because it contains the expression of Holocaust denial, which would fall under this sort of hateful speech category. Now, the problem, in my opinion, is that what YouTube is demonstrated then that it's really bad at, and I haven't changed my opinion about this, is understanding the context in which something is presented. They have what they call the ESDA exception, educational, scientific, documentary, or artistic, to some of their rules, such as about hateful speech. So while a video adoringly presenting Adolf Hitler giving a racist speech would be considered a hateful video, everybody knows that a documentary about World War II containing Hitler saying those things obviously is a different context in which the video would not be hateful. So in my case, right, my video was not a Holocaust denying video. It was a video of two people arguing with a person who was a Holocaust denier. And YouTube's automated system seemed not to make that distinction. And not only did it penalize the video, but in this swoop, it demonetized my video as well as many other channels. My understanding is there was an elementary school history teacher who had a YouTube channel that similarly was removed because it had World War II history in it that YouTube's robots or whatever couldn't sort of figure out the difference. It took 7 months of me sort of hounding YouTube on this subject before they actually said it was demonetized in error. So that happened mid-2019, and then in 2020, they remonetized it. Fast forward to only 1 year later, I am documenting the Stop the Steal movement. And in particular, this leads up to But I should be clear, there were about 70 events that I filmed, or 70 videos worth of events that I had filmed prior to January 6th about that subject. And so when January 6th happens, YouTube similarly makes kind of an urgent call about changing their approach to, in this case, election denial being the subject. And whereas before what they had kind of screwed up on the hate speech thing was that they had an exception, but they just did a bad job of applying it. This time they said, we're going to make a clearer version of what is expected, but they changed this standard and then made it effective retroactively, which is that they said, now if a video contains in any way a claim that the 2020 election was stolen, that there was outcome determinative fraud, essentially the position of, at the time, President Trump, then the video is forbidden, with the exception of if you include what they call a countervailing view. So now YouTube basically says you're allowed to have literally the words "the election was stolen," as CNN would report or whatever, right? They're not going to ban CNN for showing that Trump said that. But the reason they wouldn't ban CNN for Trump saying that is because CNN in the same video will say the president is wrong, right? That the expectation of any video poster on the subject is that they must say that it's incorrect. And so I filmed on January 6th President Trump's speech, 70 minutes at the Ellipse prior to the Capitol riot, and then I filmed the Capitol riot itself. And ironically, my footage of the violence actually was not subject to some kind of immense penalty. My entire channel was demonetized, and my video of Trump's speech at the Ellipse was taken down and given a strike. And the basis of the strike and the demonetization was that I had not included in that video so-called countervailing views. And what that means is their expectation was that in my 70-minute raw documentary footage of the Trump supporters listening to Trump's speech from the Ellipse, that I needed to, at some point, either point the camera at me and say, Trump is wrong, or have some kind of pop-up in the video that says, go somewhere else, right? Go look at some other source that tells you the opposite. So they took down what I believed was actually a really historic, important, video, which was raw, uncut video of the people that are hearing his speech. Now, at this moment in history, Trump is being impeached for that speech, basically. He is being charged with inciting insurrection. And so what I had was raw, uncut video of the people that he allegedly incited at the moment that he allegedly incited them. Their reactions to his speech, in my view, are crucially important to American history, and YouTube's initial position was to remove it. Ultimately, I was able to get that video restored by, I shouldn't say the original video. I was able to put up a copy of it that stayed up by me saying at the beginning, like explaining why the original one went down and saying, essentially, to placate YouTube, I will tell you, my audience can go to cisa.gov/rumor control. This was a government website at the time, basically saying that the election was not stolen. And I said for countervailing views. So I very much put it in my audience's face that I'm saying this because YouTube says that you have to say this. The 2 weeks later, just to highlight the absurdity of it, and I know this has been a long-winded story, but because I had already gotten one video taken down over January 6th, I had a warning as well as the full demonetization. So with the warning, a strike would then cause your channel to be suspended. On Inauguration Day, I was filming a group stand outside of the inauguration, right, protesting against Biden, and then people are yelling at them, people who are, in some cases, Biden supporters, in some cases just apparently not happy with the those people who had showed up to protest. And there was literally a shirtless man who yelled at the religious people. He said, correct your hate. I've watched it a million times, so I have the exact words in my head. He said, correct your hate, correct your hate, correct your hate. I still believe the election was stolen, but you, sir, are preaching the wrong form of Christianity. That was the sentence. So this was a guy who apparently supports Trump, or at least believes in Trump's election claims, but he's yelling at the religious people that he finds to be bigoted. An interesting perspective, worthwhile to include in the video. My YouTube channel was suspended and that video taken down because I didn't include a countervailing view to the shirtless man who yelled one half of one sentence about election fraud in the context of that video. Ultimately, YouTube used an interesting word. After I criticized it, Fox News wrote a story about it. YouTube ultimately put out a statement calling it an over-enforcement. And so they ultimately did remonetize my channel because I was able to speak up so much about it. But I think that the lessons learned were that their automated systems have no understanding of context, right? Any human could look at a video that includes a random shirtless man at one point yelling a claim about election fraud and understand that that's not my position as the video maker. But a robot does not make that that distinction when it turns it into an AI transcript and just reads the text and sees the wrong words, which is how I assume that happened. I think the other takeaway is I have a big voice as a person with tens of thousands of followers on Twitter and so forth. Like, I can advocate for myself in a moment like this. Most content creators couldn't, right? If I was just some guy who had 500 subscribers and worked at a coffee shop, but I went out and filmed on an inauguration day, that person should have just as much a right to not be censored for stupid reasons. But that kind of person would have absolutely no recourse if it happened to them.
That's what I was wondering about as far as kind of the future for independent content creator journalists. What does that ecosystem look like, do you imagine?
Something that I see as a negative development, unfortunately, is that I think that there's a greater segmenting, in part because of these exact types of issues, of the different social media platforms where people are leaving ones where they're finding more disagreement, both with the people who are their fellow viewers, as well as with the content moderation policies of whichever platform they're actually on, and then going to one that's more similar to their own. And I think this creates something that's been talked about a lot, which is kind of the echo chamber effect. So just as a simple example, after Elon Musk took over Twitter, now X, it has been pretty well documented that there's been a shift algorithmically, probably toward the political right on that platform on average. I think that's pretty easy to observe just by being on it. But a result of that is that a lot of people have left and gone to, say, Blue Sky as an alternative. You also have TikTok and Instagram seem to be friendlier both to the left and I would say and to younger people, right? And so there's a greater segmenting. And so while at this exact moment, I think the platforms that I just described, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, have a bit more of a mentality of not wanting to annoy people with over harsh content moderation policies. And so at this exact moment, I'm less worried about those there. It does seem like there are other contexts where when the political right is in favor of something being censored, right? I think that the prior ones were misapplications of types of censorship that the left might be more suggestible to. Election denial, hate, right? These are things that the left would be more comfortable with generally using content moderation policies to stop. But on the other hand, in the past year, I have seen that, for example, Facebook has taken down groups related to tracking ICE, right? And so I'm not really even convinced that these platforms are more wary of overbroad content moderation policies. I think they are doing in favor of what they think their customers want, and ultimately it's a business. And so I think that the drift I see is that they just move in the direction of censorship that would be advantageous to them, right? So now Blue Sky and TikTok might be the places where you can't talk about the election or have footage of hate related things or whatever. So I guess you might find that on Facebook, if you are posting about, this is where ICE is and this is what they're doing, you might be more nervous about running into censorship that way.
I'm curious what you think as far as one of the kind of went out of order here, but one of my lightning questions is independent content creator journalists, are they surviving, thriving, or dying? And where do you see that happening?
Yeah, I think that there's a few different categories. And so the first category distinction that I'd like to make is that there are some people who are just completely online and don't actually go out and don't make anything. The monetization model of the social media platforms has made it such that because you're getting basically paid on clicks and attention and so forth, you actually have the greatest ratio of dollars per work if you don't do any work and you steal other people's work. So I wouldn't even necessarily count these people in the category you just described, because you're not a content creator if you're not creating anything, you're just stealing it. But I do want to point out that there are a lot of people who, and they aren't even necessarily in this country, right? Something that Twitter changed that I actually do appreciate is like what country the person logs in from, because you'll find that there are people who have American flags and, present themselves as if they're American journalists or American voters, right? Like, oh, I'm just a regular, Midwest man who loves Donald Trump, right? And then you like look at the part of the bio that you have to like do an extra click to check, and like the person is located in like Southeast Asia or something. A lot of these accounts exist to take footage from people like me or whoever else is on the ground and then repackage them in a viral way. And then when people click on the video as posted by them, that person is making the monetization. I think that's doing an enormous amount of damage to the ecosystem. I consider myself primary source documentary. In other words, I want people talking about it. I want them criticizing it and analyzing it and whatever, right? If a YouTuber technically like takes my footage, but then they're offering like meaningful commentary on it, I'm basically fine or happy with them doing that. But that's something that's actually transformative, that actually adds to the conversation. When people just steal stuff, that kind of person, that's a trend that the kind of financial incentives have built that I'm strongly disapproving of. But so as far as the people who actually go out and make things, right? So shaving off all the people that I just described, out of the people who go out there and make things, I think another real problem that has been incentivized in today's attention economy is the need for people to be like an influencer. And so for me going out on field, I very rarely place myself in my content. When I am live streaming, occasionally I will speak into my live stream to give basic context, like, those are DHS, they're federal agents, those are LAPD, those are local cops. They might look the same, but like that's how you know the difference, and I only saw tear gas being fired by the federal agents, but I only saw arrests being made by LAPD, right? So sort of real example, right? Like from on Saturday, right? Like I'll give some contextual information, but basically the video is not about me. In my 4K highlight reel of this Saturday, the only time that I put myself in the video was when a lot of activists and press got kettled, they escorted press out of that kettle. And I actually pointed the camera at myself to show that a cop was holding me by the arm, okay, let's go, buddy, right? Like that moment, I placed myself in the frame because something was sort of being done to me. But the point is, my videos are not about me, and I think traditionally independent journalism or journalism itself should be like that. In this exact moment, there's kind of an attention economy where there's a lot of kids, for lack of a better word. I feel like an old guy being like, oh, those kids, and the people I'm talking about are like mid-20s, But there's a lot of young people who are getting into sort of independent content creation, which I think is good. But their tendency is to place themselves in the scene, that they're at something, of historic significance, that they're watching people be tear gassed or arrested or whatever, and they're shooting it in selfie mode, that the video is about them being there. That can be a style that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think that it definitely becomes a bad thing when the greater the extent to which the thing becomes about them being there. A thing that I've now watched happen in many cities is people will show up to film their own either participation in something or antagonization of something, where, like, for example, a right-wing content creator will show up and film themselves asking intentionally provocative, advocating type of questions to people who are on the left to see them get mad or even physically violent toward the content creator. And then their headline becomes, I got attacked at the thing, right? This is sort of the exact opposite of my approach. And frankly, that I find to be sort of dangerous for the media ecosystem as well.
Off the top of your head, can you think of a couple of independent content creators, the journalists who are doing it right or are doing it ethically as you see it?
Yeah. So it's funny, as you started that question, I wasn't sure if you were going to ask me to call out the bad ones. And I was about to say, no, I don't want to do that. And then you ask who are the good ones. And I'm like, oh, that's nice. So the two other journalists and there's not only two, but the two other journalists that I would point out that I would say do a very, very similar business model to me. They don't use the word primary source documentary, but the way that I define that term, I find them to fit into that definition for me, would be Brendan Gutenschwager, who goes by the name BG on the Scene, and Scooter Caster, whose platform is called FreedomNewsTV. They're based in Michigan and New York, respectively, but do very similar content to mine. BG, like myself, does live stream at events. Scooter doesn't live stream as much, but quite similarly to myself, both of them are primarily business to business in terms of their business, right? That they're licensing to other places, but the actual content that you're watching is very raw, that I feel comfortable telling someone you can go watch their coverage of something and its presentation will not be guided based on whatever those two politically believe.
You mentioned business to business as your business model.
Mhm.
Whatever you're comfortable with sharing, how do you survive as far as economy? Is that a structure that other independent creators could lean into, or can you see other avenues?
Hey, this is a non-commercial commercial, and the only break I'm taking in this entire podcast to make one request. If you're enjoying this content, guess what? We're not getting paid for this at all. So it would really help us if you would share, subscribe, follow, like all of those fun things that take a couple seconds, a minute of your time, means so much to us and technically doesn't cost a thing. So with that, back to the show. Thanks for listening. Oh, I almost forgot. I also would love you to comment. Let us know what we're getting right. Let us know what we're getting wrong and what you'd like to see more of.
Because I think that's a big challenge and barrier for people starting out.
Yeah, so something that I did only at the very beginning and would advise against, right? So something I did only like 10 years ago was allowing news outlets to use my work for free just so that I could see the credit, on air or whatever. And I wouldn't say I regret doing that in the very beginning, but it was while I was learning, right? I think that something that makes it a barrier to entry has become that there's almost an expectation among especially corporate news outlets that content can be available for free, that somebody goes out to an event, they take a viral clip or whatever, and they post it on some social media platform. And then a corporate news outlet, call them Fox News or CNN or NBC, right, sees that clip and they start the conversation at, did you take the, like, a very typical question that they'll tweet at them or send them a message, did you take this video and can we use it in perpetuity on all platforms, throughout the universe? And so, and how would you like to be credited if we do that, right? Like sometimes, like, people, they'll start the conversation there. And so for me, I don't actually receive that kind of message very often at all, because at least the corporate news outlets know that I will say no to that question, that I will change that I will answer that question by saying, of course you can license it for a fee. Please let me know if you want to discuss that. And in some cases of outlets that I license to frequently enough, I'll be like, of course you can license it for, and then tell them the price. But the answer is not going to be that it's free. I think for some content creators, especially who are new to it, there might be an apprehension about asking for money, a concern that they're passing up on an opportunity if the outlet says no. And it is true that my content is seen less, on the cable outlets than it would be if I just let them all use it for free all the time. So in some cases, you're going to say, I'd need to be paid for it. And they go, well, then we're not doing it. But the comment I would make about that is, first of all, the reason that it's easier for them to say, then we won't buy it, is because other people will give it to them for free. So if everybody knows their worth, then everybody can, then all freelancers and so forth can be paid for it, right? It kind of drags everybody down when people do deliver for free. But also, if you're generating good, important work, you establish a reputation that you will not have it be free or for cheap, then they will eventually sort of be willing to pay for it when it shows up. So for new content creators, I would say know your worth. If you're going out and you're not being paid at all for something, then publish it independently, so that what you're getting out of it is the reach, that the views are on your own stuff, which in some cases can lead to ad monetization. But then if a corporation wants to use it, then they have to pay for it. And I'm not going to talk about pricing like in this video, but I do tell other content creators, if someone is new to it and they get a licensing inquiry, I tell them, call me really quick and I'll tell you, what I would charge for this same thing. I think that rises all of us up. I very much don't think of fellow freelancers and independent journalists as competitors. I think of it as all of us versus the man.
Well, it sounds a bit like, tell me if I got this wrong, but based on our conversation, It sounds like the way you've worked out working as an independent journalist is to work kind of parallel in collaboration with legacy media, kind of like that structure, rather than it's not a takeover or any in that way as in order to survive. Is that fair, or how would you like to talk about that?
I mean, the big media corporations, there's basically 6 of them that own 90% of what we watch. I'm under no illusion that, we the independent journalists are going to have some kind of David and Goliath moment where everyone stops watching Fox and NBC because, little old like me and other freelancers are out there. No, I mean, I prefer my model, right? I would love if everyone would just watch raw content of what goes on in the world, but I realize that that's not how most people consume the news. I do think, though, that it makes the mainstream media better if they're relying on those sorts of on the ground reporters, because people can then reference that full content, right? So if, say, an outlet, again, Fox or NBC, right, to try to be politically neutral about it, quote unquote, right, that either one of them could license content from me and then post a very short snippet of it that makes whatever point that they're trying to make, as opposed to if they had filmed the thing themselves. If they license it from me, my full version is out there online. So if somebody sees it on television and on TV, there's sort of a misleading presentation of it, they can go and see the full context. Really, to put this in practical terms, when I'm out there at something where there ends up being like a fight, tear gas versus, protesters or whatever, if an outlet was to just show the tear gassing or just show some, fighting or whatever, context about how that actually happened, I think is important and almost impossible to present on cable news. But if a cable news reporter was out there shooting it themselves, that context wouldn't be available to their viewer. Whereas if I'm contributing it, then it is. So I'm not trying to compete necessarily with the mainstream media. I'm not taking them down, but I do think that it actually forces them to be a little bit more accountable. Try.
I'm curious, for the record, kind of where do you find yourself getting your news?
I do use social media as the main tool. I tend to follow journalists rather than outlets. So I'm deeply critical usually of the mainstream media outlets themselves, but I found specific journalists, both from independent and from so-called mainstream or corporate, that I follow and basically trust. And I would give the same advice to anybody else, right? Rather than the companies, which can have a deep diversity of quality, among them. I would find actual press that you trust, and similarly try to have that be a variety of people that is challenging whatever preconceived notions you have.
Now, we've gotten towards the end. Is there anything we didn't cover that you feel is important to add or push further, or anything that we kind of questions we can leave open for the audience?
I think that a subject that it felt like we were maybe going to go to, but that hadn't happened yet, was just the manner in which, in this moment, but it's always been a problem, but in this moment, the state itself may be unhappy with being documented. So in the Trump administration, right, in the last year and a half, there has been a big change in how they're communicating about what they are doing on the ground. Something that I've witnessed in the past year, federal agents, right, mostly affiliated with immigration enforcement of some kind, they've got these guys with masked up, full like border patrol uniforms, but they've got gimbals and like high-end DSLRs, and they're operating drones and stuff. So they're taking super nifty, well-produced video that they make into highly stylized, cut together, almost like music videos of the stuff that they've been doing. This was a phenomenon that I saw in New Orleans, Chicago, Minneapolis, that they're making super stylized videos of what's going on out there. And obviously, I would say that independent journalism is very much an antidote to like state narratives about what's going on the ground. When I was in Minneapolis, part of how you document ICE is quite literally to follow around reports of where ICE are and follow them, so that then when they get out of the car and question or detain somebody, that you're able to document exactly what that looks like. In my most recent trip to Minneapolis, the official ICE Twitter account or X account actually quote tweeted a video of mine of the driving being done by the ICE agents. I posted a clip from inside of a car showing how they would do these silly evasive maneuvers like putting on a right turn signal and then turning left, right, to try to like throw off journalists from following them. And I posted like a little clip of them doing that, and they described it as stalking. They actually, in an official federal government communication, technically, right? But it was a tweet, right? So I don't want to make more out of it than it is. But technically, from an official government account, they referred to it as stalking and said that it's not journalism, but activism. And to be fair, there were right-wing people even who replied to it saying like, Ford's not doing activism. Like that was like a cheap shot on ICE's part. And even people who liked ICE did not did not agree with what they had stated there. But in addition to, I guess I would say, set by the corporations who have a lot more leverage because it's their own private platform, I do think that there can be a creeping sense of, although it wasn't actual censorship, they didn't force the video to be taken down somehow, and I didn't get arrested, right? They didn't charge me with stalking or obstructing or something, right? But there's definitely at least a comfortability that somebody with an official government platform was able to make that type of comment about a journalist. And in the next 3 years, we'll see whether that kind of thing escalates. Will there be greater steps taken to try to characterize documenting the actions of the state as obstructing the state and so forth?
Along those same lines, maybe you want to touch on which we hadn't yet either, the idea of security. I mean, as an independent person, you're in a different position than perhaps being under a big umbrella of legacy media. So how do you protect yourself and advocate? Well, we talked a little bit, I guess, about advocating for yourself, but how do you protect yourself?
Yeah, so on the ground at events, sounds real simple, but really try to establish a buddy system. So although I am personally working independently, I usually know other freelancers who are going to be at things. And I also put a lot of effort into, prior to events, making that be the case. So if I know that I'm going to go to Minneapolis and sort of cover ICE for a week, I'll find other people who want to stay at the same Airbnb as me or carpool with me and so forth, so that you try never to really be alone in those situations. That if I was to be arrested or injured or any possible eventuality like that, you want to know that there are people around you who you trust and care for. And I think that you form bonds doing this kind of work that are really close, where you have that enormous level of trust. And sort of like I mentioned before, in some cases, those would be people who I consider to technically be competitors from a business standpoint, but you really don't end up feeling that mentality when you're on the ground there side by side with each other. You do look out for each other, you do help each other, you are ready to call each other's spouses if something goes wrong. So I would say that the buddy system is probably the most important thing. Just try not to be out there alone, even if you don't formally have a team.
This is a complete side note, but it just kind of struck me, and I didn't mention it earlier when you were talking about being a primary documentarian. What do you think of the 360 camera and having that out there?
Yeah, I still have a Ricoh Theta 360. So I actually did buy a camera like that a long time ago, and I used it at a couple of different events. I think that the theoretical positive of it is that in the same way that live stream eliminates time manipulation as a thing that gets you further from truth, right? So if you think of just the event as the truth of the event, and then any manner in which you record it is taking you a step away from it, but sharing it to the world, right? So like a photograph is a single moment in time, right? It's an accurate depiction of one exact moment from one exact angle, right? And then a video is that, but a motion picture, right? And then the live stream is eliminating the element of it being cut apart. So you're getting a complete look at it time-wise, but it's only in the direction the camera's going. In theory, you could think of a 360 video as eliminating angle as a obscuring element of medium. That might sound a little bit like MFA kind of talk. And to be clear, I do not have a master's of fine arts. I was just there's a little bit of like a philosophical reason why I would like 360. And that's why I bought one of those cameras to do it experimentally. In practice, I think what I found is that it's a little bit hard. Not that many people are actually using it like as consumers. Like not that many people are going to be scrolling around looking for individual things. I think that it's like a little bit hard to apply. So I think it's a cool art form for the reason that I just described, and I think in theory it could be used. I would love to have a 360 VR documentary of January 6th. Like that might be more informative, if January 6th had been shot that way, right? But I think it's hard enough to apply that I wouldn't really recommend that people actually try to make a primary like job out of it. But if somebody did, I would find it really cool. I mean, I have a VR headset. If anyone wants to go to a riot and film in really high quality, 360, I'd love to be able to experience that from them.
Yeah, I was just curious because I played around with it a little bit myself. I was expecting you to say it's still a bit clunky in the post-production sort of phase, and you're moving a lot of times faster than 360 would be appropriate. That's what I thought you were going to say, but I love that you like it appeals to you in concept and theory. That works. I'm wondering now, after talking to you, if perhaps this episode, I usually do a little bit of editing, not a lot, but should I, as homage to you, not edit the podcast at all and just shove it out as it is?
I wouldn't tell you necessarily how to edit your product. I trust you to do it either way. If you remove all of my ums, I'm not going to go, you messed it up. I
Yeah,
know I said there.
it's pretty, it'll be minuscule. It'll be minuscule editing. So let me just get quickly to my little thank you so much, Ford, for joining us and everyone listening or watching. If something stood out as being incorrect, please let us know. Or if you think we missed something, we want to hear from you. Or Ford, if you think of something later, I'm happy to amend our show notes. We'll log any updates or corrections in those show notes. And if this episode added something to your thinking, please consider subscribing and passing it along. And that is the end. Unless, of course, we do have 3 minutes if there's one last thing you want to add in.
I would say that if anybody is an aspiring independent journalist, if you're trying to enter this space, I really do like trying to help people out with it. I think that we all succeed better if everybody kind of succeeds. So I'd be happy to answer questions from anybody, especially who is aspiring to be an independent journalist.
Well, I have to say, I appreciate that I was able to reach you and you made that easy on your website and giving me an hour of your time to talk. But until we meet again.